many people think that when this topic comes up, they say it can't happen here. And so, look, we took a look at the old eugenics, and really it did happen here. The 1927 Buck versus Bell Supreme Court decision in which the United States approved a Virginia law, of a compulsory sterilization law. The woman named Carrie Buck, 5 months after the decision was sterilized, and the reason she was, what was it? Because she was the probable parent of potentially defective offspring. I think that was the phrase that was used. These things have happened in the United States, and there's no reason to think that such things can't happen in the future. And we shouldn't think that when we think of eugenicists, we think of Nazis, or we think of monsters, right? That isn't the way it worked. As you go back and you read the literature, it's frequently pleasant, smiling elites that encourage this kind of horrible approach to their fellow human beings, but all in the name of improving their fellow human beings. We've had a wonderful explosion of information here. I mean, we've mapped the human genome. We've got wonderful possibilities here for the future, but there's no reason to think that human nature has changed, and that somehow we will only do good in the future. It's just as likely we will do as much evil in the future as we've done in the past. And so I've asked Wes to join me to talk about where we are in this discussion of the new eugenics. And you've written recently that we now can test a fetus's genome through non-invasive means. Now, how do you see that as posing a crucial challenge to the moral integrity of our society?
Well, we have a society that is increasingly rejecting the sanctity of human life, the equality of human life, human exceptionalism, the idea that being human in and of itself is of intrinsic and calculable value. We are already engaged in a what I call a search and destroy mission to wipe people with Down syndrome off the face of the earth, with amniocentesis and so forth. Right now, today, 90% of fetuses that test for genetic conditions such as Down syndrome or dwarfism are aborted. They are not permitted to be born. What's ironic is we live in an age in which supposedly we're the most diverse and tolerant, but there is no tolerance for these kinds of issues. And we also have the transhumanist movement and others who are not only pushing for human immortality, but a post-human species created through technology, cyber technology, biotechnology, human enhancement, genetic engineering, which is, of course, a new master race theory. Right. The idea that we can create a Superman. And this is extremely dangerous stuff. Science is neutral. It's like the Force, you know. There's the negative side and the positive side. So when we as human beings develop these very powerful informational mediums, media, and when we learn how to deal with these things, it can be used for positive or negative consequences. The only way to keep it a positive consequence is to maintain a belief in the sanctity of life, a belief in intrinsic human dignity and human equality, a belief in human exceptionalism, and base our public policies and our ethical values and our moral codes on those. But when we say, as we are today, that parents not only have the right to have a child, but to have the child they want, then you are unleashing a potential pogrom against those supposedly deemed defective. Right now with in vitro fertilization, as another example, they will test the embryos that are created, and they will toss aside the ones that don't pass muster based on various, sometimes, usually right now it's health, but it's not going to stay that way. We've already seen advertising, for example, for pre-genetic determination of hair color or eye color. And you're going to end up in a kind of a Gattaca, which I think is a very interesting science fiction picture, motion picture situation where not only can parents custom order, let's say, their progeny, but they're going to be required to. Right. Just as the old eugenics began kind of as a voluntary idea of let's get the best eugenic people together and have them procreate and help the human race, so the new eugenics, which is right now touted as laissez-faire, that is, it'll all be choice, 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 that only works until the majority of people support the eugenics. Then choice ends. And when choice ends, you end up with government coercion. And you're already seeing articles in bioethics and medical journals in which they say, well, the new eugenics, this will all be laissez-faire. There won't be government mandates. However, remember, there's always a however, right, or a but. If such and such occurs, then perhaps, et cetera, et cetera. And realize also with the real incredible focus right now on health cost containment, you are talking about, with regard to some people, people who may be expensive to care for. And when you have a relative quality of life, as it's often called, value system,
right.
It is a new eugenics, and it's going in both directions. The negative to prevent certain types of people from being born, and the positive, which is the idea of human enhancement, enhancing for intelligence, and so forth. But what I find remarkable is the most important human attribute I can think of is love. And who are more loving than people with Down syndrome?
Right. Right.
And yet they're the ones who are, right at the moment, the prime targets. Right. I remember when I was young, and you and I are probably close to the same age, you'd see a lot of people with Down syndrome.
Yeah.
They offered tremendous benefit to our society. Yeah. They reminded us to be nice to each other.
They did.
They allowed people to just kind of stop and give selflessly and plant those seeds. And now you rarely see people with Down syndrome. There's that movie on HBO, The Game of Thrones, and the actor who was a dwarf who won the Emmy Award. Look at people like him are being prevented from being born at an incredible percentage.
Yeah.
And it's a terrible thing because we are refusing to look at each and every one of us as having equal inherent moral worth and having unique dignity. What is it St. Paul said? We were, for those who have faith, we were, God knew us before we were born, as we were being created in the womb. It's a terrible, terrible imposition. And then you add in the final point, we're the species that created the unsinkable ship Titanic. We don't have the wisdom to decide who's good and who's not good, who's better and who's worse.
Right.
Are you kidding me?
Yeah. It's amazing. I really don't think people understand. They don't have a feel for how perilous this is because they don't. I don't think they have any personal familiarity with the literature. You know what I'm saying? People they hear people talk about Peter Singer, but they don't read Peter Singer.
And they don't believe that anybody takes him seriously.
That's right.
But and it's the idea of you've got a full flat out. Let me use the imagery from the Lord of the Rings. The orcs are going to attack the wall, and nobody believes orcs exist, or that they can cap that many people. So why should we defend the wall?
Right.
And then when the orcs are inside the wall, the idea of diversity tolerance is going to go away because often they don't believe in that. Mm-hmm. That's just a message they send that allows them through the gate to keep mixing my metaphors here. And there's also this idea of entitlement that we've created for ourselves as a society, that we are entitled. You deserve. One of the things that drives me crazy in advertising, you deserve this.
Right. That
we are somehow entitled to have a life and to have perfect children and to have a life without any kind of difficulty, rather than, I think, a more loving and caring and truly humane society in which when these difficult issues arise for us, we are there for each other to help carry each other's burdens and loads. That's what compassion means, to suffer with.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's, of course, supposed to be one of the characteristics of the Christian community, too, that we bear one another's burdens.
Yes.
And that which we hold is very important is now being looked upon as kind of an unnecessary, quote, virtue, something we really don't need to do, because why? Let's just get rid of the burdens, by which we mean, well, we're not just going to eliminate suffering, we're going to eliminate sufferers. This way I don't have to carry them.
That's right, and that's where eliminating suffering becomes the very fundamental purpose of society, the concept of what constitutes suffering becomes very malleable.
Yes.
Not only is let me give you do I have time to tell you my Uncle Bruno's story?
Yeah.
My Uncle Bruno Micheletti, he died of Alzheimer's disease. Now let's take a look at his situation. So I've got a very close-up and personal view of how this can go. Let's take a look. Did my Uncle Bruno Micheletti suffer? Yes, he suffered. He ended up a man who was helpless. He ended up a man who had almost no memory. He ended up, because he had severe glaucoma, confused and clinging to a wheelchair. So people might say, well, that was useless living. Well, of course it wasn't, but let's look at who else suffered. My Aunt Martha, his wife, suffered because it was a devastation for her to watch her husband of it was almost 60 years, go through such a terrible travail. My mother, my uncle's sister, suffered watching her brother, who basically cared for her from the age of 5 as the male figure in the home, because my mother's father died very young. And this is in the 1920s. My mother's 95 now. This is in the 1920s when there were no services. My uncle kind of became her protector and the primary male figure for her. So she'd known him her whole life, her older brother, and watching him suffer. My cousin, their daughter, suffered because of what their parents were experiencing. I suffered too, going through this, and I was my uncle's caregiver in terms of surrogate decision making. Those were not easy issues to deal with.
Right.
Then they would also say, and I've seen this in bioethical journals, the medical team who cared for my uncle in a wonderful Alzheimer's unit. It was in a Baptist home in Alhambra, California. They could be said to suffer because they had. When I visit my uncle, you'd see 50 people, just like my uncle, going through very difficult situations. And some would even say, "My gosh, the society suffered because of the money that was spent on caring for my uncle, who was no longer a productive person." Of course, my position is that my uncle had a greater claim on us because he had lost the ability to be independent, not a lesser claim because he was no longer productive. And I think those two kind of dichotomies, those two views are in competition right now. And I think the right side can win this fight if people get engaged and quit saying, well, it can't happen here, or, well, what can I do? I'm just a person. We have lost this fight already at the academic level, in the intelligentsia, in the medical intelligentsia, among the technocrats, the bureaucrats. But we can win it on Main Street, and we're the majority, but we won't win it unless people start saying, not on my watch, this is not going to happen.
Right, I agree. That stance has to be taken, and the elite are not going to do it. They no longer have the moral courage to say no to this kind of thing. They're utilitarians at heart. They resist the idea of any moral absolutes, and I don't think that they
do, and they also have tremendous faith in their ability to manage things. So you have a technocratic class that's being created. In which they think they can manage all of the problems of life, which of course nobody can. And then when things go wrong, their answer is more technocratic tinkering.
Right.
And we go from problem to worse problem to worse problem.
Wes, give us the website.
www.wesleyjsmith.com will take you to my blog, and I'm on First Things every other Friday with a column and an article on these kinds of issues.
All right. Thanks, Wes.